Welcome to HOA Karen Patrol. The HOA wanted control, not safety. My name is Derek, and I never thought a patch of black ice would destroy my life. I am standing on my front porch in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, at 6:30 in the morning, and Stephanie Perez is screaming at me about non-compliance. She is holding a bag of ice melt like it is a weapon, snatching it back every time I try to explain. And she just hit me with a $200 fine for creating a slip hazard. The black ice is right there on my sidewalk, gleaming under the porch light, and she is saying I caused it by shoveling improperly. I have been awake for 10 minutes. This is not snow. It is non-compliance, she says, jabbing a finger at the ice. That is her line. She has said it twice already, and I have a feeling I am going to hear it a lot more before this is over. I moved here 8 months ago because I wanted to own something real after years of fixing other people's problems as an apartment maintenance supervisor. I thought home ownership meant freedom. I thought wrong. The Preserve at Frostwood HOA Incorporated has rules for everything, and Stephanie Perez, the board secretary, enforces them like her life depends on it. She controls the paperwork, the complaint log, the meeting minutes, every notice that goes out. If you cross her, you do not just get a fine. You get buried. Right now she is burying me, and I have a family event this weekend that I cannot miss. My sister is flying in from Spokane. My parents are driving up from Boise, and we are all meeting at my place because I finally have space. Stephanie is trying to sabotage parking and access, and she is doing it with snow rules that nobody else in the neighborhood seems to follow. The first sign of trouble came 3 weeks ago. I was shoveling my driveway after the season's first real storm, and Stephanie walked by with a handheld stopwatch. She did not say hello. She did not wave. She clicked the stopwatch, stared at me, clicked it again, and walked away. I thought it was weird, but I figured she was timing her own walk or something. 2 days later, I got a notice in my mailbox. Violation of snow removal protocol. Failure to clear walkways within the prescribed 4-hour window. $50 fine. I called the HOA management number, and the woman who answered said Stephanie had logged the complaint herself. I asked what the 4-hour window even meant, and she said it was in the winter addendum to the CC&Rs. I pulled up the documents online, and sure enough, buried on page 47 of a PDF nobody reads, there was a clause about clearing snow within 4 hours of cessation of precipitation. Stephanie had timed me with that stopwatch and decided I was 15 minutes late. I paid the $50 because I did not want to fight. That was my mistake. Stephanie saw weakness, and she came back harder. The next storm, I shoveled everything within 2 hours. I cleared the driveway, the front walk, the sidewalk along the street, even the little path to my mailbox. I salted everything. I was so careful. The next morning, I woke up to another notice. This time, it said I had created a slip hazard by piling snow too close to the curb, obstructing drainage, and causing ice formation. Another $50. I went outside and looked at the snowbank. It was maybe 8 inches from the curb, same as everyone else's. I walked down the block and counted. 9 houses had bigger piles than mine. None of them had notices. I took pictures on my phone and sent them to the management company with a complaint. They replied 2 days later saying Stephanie had reviewed my concern and determined the violation was valid. Of course she did. She wrote the response herself. That was when I realized Stephanie was not enforcing rules. She was farming complaints. She would walk the neighborhood with that stopwatch and a clipboard, looking for anything she could twist into a violation. Other neighbors started telling me stories. The guy 2 doors down got fined for leaving his trash bins out 30 minutes too long on collection day. The couple across the street got hit with a noise complaint because their snowblower started at 7 in the morning, which apparently violated the quiet hours that ran until 7:15. Every complaint went through Stephanie, and every fine stuck because she controlled the paperwork. If you appealed, she wrote the appeal response. If you asked for a hearing, she set the date and took the minutes. The system was rigged, and she was the rigger. I started keeping a log. Every time I shoveled, I wrote down the time, took pictures, noted the weather. I wanted proof I was following the rules. My friend Jason, a property manager who has dealt with HOA nightmares for years, told me to document everything. Get timestamps. Get witnesses. Get video if you can, he said. These board tyrants only back down when you have proof they cannot spin. So I started recording. I mounted a doorbell camera that covered my front walk and driveway. I set my phone to auto backup photos. I even bought a cheap action camera and clipped it to my jacket when I shoveled, just in case Stephanie showed up with another stopwatch stunt. She did. The third storm hit on a Tuesday night, and I was out at 5 in the morning, clearing everything before work. Stephanie appeared at 5:45 with her stopwatch and her clipboard. She stood at the end of my driveway, timing me, writing notes. I kept shoveling. When I finished, she walked up and said I had used improper technique and created a hazard by pushing snow into the street. I looked at the street. There was no snow in the street. I had piled everything on my lawn, same as always. She pointed at a tiny ridge of slush near the curb and said that constituted a public safety risk. She clicked her stopwatch one more time, made a note, and walked away. 2 days later, another notice. Another $50. This time, the violation report included a sentence that made my blood run cold. Repeated noncompliance may result in escalated fines, legal action, or loss of community privileges, including guest parking and amenity access. Guest parking. My family was coming in 10 days, and Stephanie was threatening to block them from parking anywhere near my house. I called Jason, and he told me to file a formal records request. Ask for every complaint filed against you, every notice issued, and every board meeting minute that mentions your address, he said. They have to provide it under Idaho law. If they stall, that is a violation. So I sent the request by certified mail, return receipt requested. I asked for everything in writing. The management company confirmed receipt, and Stephanie called me 2 hours later. Her voice was syrup sweet and sharp as a knife. I understand you are requesting records, she said. That is your right, of course, but I want you to know that filing excessive requests can be considered harassment under our community standards. I said I was asking for documents I was legally entitled to, and she said, make it public. I love watching people get embarrassed. Then she hung up. That line stuck with me. Make it public. I love watching people get embarrassed. She said it like she had done this before, like she enjoyed it. I started asking around the neighborhood more carefully. A rideshare driver I recognized from the corner told me he had seen Stephanie posting notices on doors when people were not home. She would take a picture of the notice on the door, write the time on her clipboard, and leave. I asked if he had ever seen her actually talk to the homeowners first, and he rolled his eyes and said, never. She just shows up, slaps paper, and disappears. Another neighbor, an older woman who had lived in Frostwood for 15 years, told me Stephanie had been board secretary for 3 years and had driven 4 families out of the neighborhood with endless violation letters and fines stacking. She operates like this is her kingdom, the neighbor said, and nobody votes her out because she controls who gets nominated and when the elections happen. I got the records a week later. Stephanie had stalled as long as she could, but the management company finally sent a PDF with 32 pages of complaints, notices, and board notes. I read every word. The pattern was obvious. Almost every complaint against me was written in the same voice, the same phrasing. Observed non-compliance, assessed violation, issued notice. It was Stephanie. She was writing complaints, filing them as if neighbors had reported them, and then responding to them as board secretary. She was manufacturing the entire paper trail. I showed Jason, and he said, "That is fraud. If you can prove she is inventing complaints and attributing them to other people, that is falsification of records. You need to find out if any of these neighbors actually filed anything." So I started knocking on doors. Most people were surprised. The couple 3 houses down had no idea their names were attached to a noise complaint about my snowblower. The guy across the street said he never filed anything about my trash bins, and he was annoyed someone had used his name. I got statements from 5 neighbors saying they never filed the complaints Stephanie attributed to them. I typed everything up, scanned their signatures, and added it to my file. Jason said it was enough to demand a hearing and possibly involve the Idaho Attorney General's office if the HOA did not fix it. But before I could file anything, the black ice incident happened. It was a Friday morning, 6 days before my family was supposed to arrive. I woke up to a cold snap. Overnight, the temperature had dropped to 15 degrees, and everything that had melted during the day refroze into sheets of ice. My front walk was slick. I went out with a bag of ice melt and spread it carefully, then went back inside to make coffee. 20 minutes later, Stephanie was pounding on my door. I opened it, and she started yelling immediately. "You created this hazard," she said, pointing at the black ice on my sidewalk. "You shoveled improperly, you let meltwater run across the walkway, and now there is a liability issue." I told her the ice formed overnight because of the temperature drop, and she cut me off. "This is not snow. It is non-compliance," she said. She was holding that bag of ice melt, snatching it back every time I tried to reach for it. "I am issuing you a $200 fine and a formal warning. If this happens again, we will pursue a lien on your property." I said almost nothing, because silence makes people talk. Stephanie kept going. She said I was a problem resident, that I had been flagged for repeated violations, that the board was considering a formal compliance hearing. She said my guest parking privileges were under review, and if I did not shape up, my family would have to park on the street a quarter mile away and walk. She was talking fast, almost giddy, and I realized she was performing. She wanted me to snap. She wanted me to yell so she could add hostile behavior to her complaint log. So I stayed quiet. I held my thermos mug, let the steam curl up in the cold, and watched her. After a minute, she ran out of things to say and just stood there, breathing hard. Then she handed me a printed notice, turned around, and walked away. I looked at the notice. It was dated and time-stamped for 6:20 a.m. I checked my doorbell camera. Stephanie had arrived at 6:18. She had printed the notice before she even came over. She knew the ice was there because she had been monitoring the weather and my property. This was premeditated. I texted Jason a picture of the notice and the camera timestamp. He called me immediately. "She is setting you up," he said. "You need to check if she has been on your property without permission. If she placed that ice or did anything to cause the hazard, you have her on video. If not, you still have proof she is targeting you. Either way, you need to go on offense before the hearing." I pulled the camera footage from the night before. At 11:40 p.m., a figure in a pink puffer coat and blue beanie walked up my front path, looked around, and crouched near the sidewalk. The camera angle was not perfect, but I could see her pouring something from a bottle onto the concrete. She stood up, looked at the result, and walked away. I played it 3 more times to be sure. Stephanie had created the black ice herself. I saved the video to 3 different drives and sent a copy to Jason. He told me not to reveal it yet. "You have a trump card," he said. "Do not waste it until the moment it will do the most damage. Let her think she is winning. Let her escalate. The more she commits to her version of events, the harder she falls when you show the proof." So I paid the $200 fine without arguing. I sent a polite email to the management company acknowledging receipt of the notice and requesting a formal hearing to discuss the pattern of violations. Stephanie replied within an hour, setting the hearing for the following Thursday at 7 p.m., the night before my family was supposed to arrive. Of course she did. The next few days were tense. Stephanie ramped up the harassment. She started walking past my house multiple times a day, always with her clipboard, always taking notes. She sent me a courtesy reminder email about the hearing, listing every violation she claimed I had committed over the past 2 months. She CC'd the entire board and the management company. The email was written like I was already guilty, like the hearing was just a formality before punishment. I did not reply. I just kept gathering evidence. I printed the doorbell footage stills, highlighting Stephanie's face and the bottle in her hand. I compiled the neighbor statements. I put together a timeline showing that every complaint against me had been filed by Stephanie, not by actual neighbors. Jason helped me draft a short presentation. 3 minutes, he said. Hit them with the proof fast, do not let her interrupt, and force them to vote on the record. 2 days before the hearing, Stephanie pulled her ambush. I got a group email sent to every homeowner in Frostwood. The subject line was Community Safety Alert. The body of the email said that due to repeated snow removal violations and hazardous conditions at a specific property, the board was implementing temporary parking restrictions on my street. Guest parking would be suspended until further notice, and any unauthorized vehicles would be towed at owner's expense. She did not name me directly, but everyone knew. My address was the only one on the block that had been issued multiple notices. Neighbors started texting me. Some were supportive, asking if I was okay. Others were annoyed that their guests would be affected. One guy said his in-laws were visiting that weekend, and now they had nowhere to park. Stephanie had turned the neighborhood against me without even using my name. I called Jason, and he said this was the escalation we needed. She is overreaching, he said. If she is restricting parking based on alleged violations that have not been adjudicated, that is punitive action without due process. Bring it up at the hearing. Demand an explanation. Make her defend it in front of the board. So I wrote a formal objection and sent it to the management company, requesting that the parking restriction be lifted immediately pending the hearing outcome. Stephanie replied again, saying the restriction was a safety measure and would remain in place. Then she added a line that made my stomach drop. Additionally, we have scheduled a property inspection for your residence on Saturday morning to assess ongoing compliance concerns. That was the day my family was arriving. She was going to show up with an inspection crew while my parents and sister were trying to unload their cars. I spent the next day preparing. I confirmed with Jason that Stephanie could not legally enter my property without permission, and he said to deny access unless she had a warrant or a legitimate emergency. If she shows up, record everything, he said. Do not let her bully her way in. If she tries, call the police and file a trespassing complaint. I also reached out to a few neighbors who had been sympathetic and asked if they would be willing to attend the hearing as witnesses. 3 people agreed. One of them, a guy named Mark, who had been fined for leaving his recycling bin out too long, said he had his own stack of bogus notices and was ready to speak up. The hearing was supposed to be at the community clubhouse, but the morning of, I got an email saying the location had been changed to the board president's house due to a scheduling conflict. I smelled a setup. The board president was a retired dentist named Gerald, who had been on the board for 10 years and always backed Stephanie. Moving the hearing to his house meant fewer witnesses, less public scrutiny, and more control for Stephanie. I forwarded the email to Jason, and he said to go anyway but to record audio if Idaho law allowed it. Idaho is a one-party consent state, so I could legally record as long as I was present. I charged my phone, put a backup recorder in my jacket pocket, and drove over. Gerald's house was at the far end of Frostwood, a big 2-story with a circular driveway and decorative lights wrapped around every tree. I parked on the street and walked up. Stephanie was already there, standing on the porch with Gerald and 2 other board members I recognized. She saw me coming and smiled. "I am glad you made it," she said. "We were worried the parking situation might be an issue." I did not respond. I walked past her and into the house. The hearing was set up in the living room, with a folding table and 6 chairs arranged in a semicircle. Stephanie sat at the center with a stack of file folders and her portable thermal printer sitting on the table in front of her like it was some kind of official seal. She kept adjusting it, holding it up slightly whenever she made a point, as if the printer itself settled everything. The hearing started at 7:15. Gerald opened by reading a generic statement about HOA compliance and community standards. Then he turned it over to Stephanie. She launched into her presentation immediately, rattling off every violation she had filed against me. Improper snow removal, hazardous ice formation, drainage obstruction, public safety risk, repeated non-compliance. She had printed new copies of every notice and passed them around the table. She talked for 10 minutes straight, and every time I tried to interject, she cut me off. "I will give you time to respond," she said. "Right now, I am presenting the facts." Gerald nodded along. The other board members looked uncomfortable, but did not say anything. When Stephanie finally finished, Gerald asked if I had anything to say. I stood up and pulled out my folder. I said I had evidence that the complaints against me were fabricated and that Stephanie had been falsifying records. I started with the neighbor statements, reading each one aloud. Stephanie interrupted immediately. "Those statements are hearsay," she said. "They are not notarized, and we have no way to verify authenticity." I said the neighbors were willing to testify in person, and 3 of them were waiting outside. Gerald looked annoyed. "This is not a courtroom," he said. "We do not need testimony. If you have documents, submit them, and we will review them later." I said I wanted them reviewed now, and Stephanie said that was not how the process worked. She pulled out her thermal printer and printed a fresh copy of the parking restriction notice, holding it up like a judge's gavel. This is effective policy, she said. You do not get to override board decisions just because you disagree. I realized I was losing. The board was not going to listen, and Stephanie was going to railroad this vote before I could get the video evidence out. So I took Jason's advice and forced the issue. I said I was invoking my right under Idaho Code to request a special meeting with full membership notice and open attendance. Stephanie's face went tight. That is unnecessary, she said. We are handling this matter tonight. I said the current hearing violated open meeting requirements because it had been moved to a private residence without proper public notice, and under Idaho HOA law, that made any vote invalid. Gerald started to argue, but one of the other board members, a woman named Linda, spoke up. He is right, she said. If we are voting on enforcement action tonight, we needed to post notice 72 hours in advance. We did not do that. Stephanie tried to talk over her, but Linda kept going. If we vote now and he challenges it, we are going to lose, and the association will be liable for his legal fees. If you are enjoying this HOA chaos, hit the like button and subscribe for more wild neighborhood drama. The room went quiet. Gerald looked at Stephanie, and she looked furious. Fine, she said. We will table the vote and schedule a proper meeting. But the parking restriction stays in place until we reconvene. I said that was unacceptable, and that I was formally requesting the restriction be lifted immediately. Stephanie said no. I pulled out my phone and played the doorbell camera footage on the screen, holding it up so everyone could see. This is from 11 p.m. the night before the black ice incident, I said. Watch. The video showed Stephanie walking up my front path, crouching down, and pouring liquid onto the sidewalk. Then she stood up and left. I paused it on a clear frame of her face. She created the hazard she fined me for, I said. That is evidence tampering and fraud. The room exploded. Stephanie started yelling that the video was doctored, that I had manipulated the footage, that it was inadmissible. Gerald tried to restore order, but Linda was staring at Stephanie with her mouth open. Did you really do that? She said. Stephanie said it was a misunderstanding, that she had been spreading ice melt as a courtesy. I rewound the video and played it again. She is pouring something from a bottle, I said. Ice melt does not come in a liquid bottle, and you do not pour it. You spread it. This is water or some other liquid she used to create ice. Stephanie stood up and grabbed her coat. This is harassment, she said. I am not going to sit here and be accused. She picked up her thermal printer and walked out. Gerald called after her, but she was gone. The hearing fell apart after that. Linda said the board needed to investigate the video evidence before proceeding with any enforcement action, and Gerald reluctantly agreed. They scheduled a special meeting for the following Tuesday and said the parking restriction would be suspended pending review. I walked out, feeling like I had won a battle, but not the war. Stephanie was cornered, but she was not done yet. I knew she would come at me harder. Saturday morning, my family arrived. My parents pulled up at 9, and my sister got there an hour later. We were unloading suitcases and groceries when Stephanie appeared at the end of my driveway with two guys in reflective vests. She had her clipboard and her bag of ice melt, and she was pointing at my house like she was giving a tour. One of the guys had a camera, the other had a tablet and was taking notes. Stephanie walked up and said they were conducting the property inspection. I told her the inspection was not authorized and she needed to leave. She said the board had approved it, and I said the board had tabled all enforcement actions at the hearing. She ignored me and tried to walk past. I stepped in front of her and said if she did not leave, I would call the police. My dad, who had been watching from the porch, came down and stood next to me. "You heard him," my dad said. "Get off his property." Stephanie's face went red. She turned to the guys in vests and told them to document everything. They looked uncomfortable. One of them said, "Ma'am, if the homeowner is refusing access, we cannot proceed without a court order." Stephanie said they were contractors hired by the HOA, and they had authority. The guy shook his head. "We are a third-party inspection service," he said. "We do not have authority to override the owner. If he says no, we leave." Stephanie argued for another minute, but the contractors were already walking back to their truck. She stood there, holding her ice melt bag, breathing hard, and then she looked at me and said, "You are going to regret this." Then she left. I filed a police report that afternoon for harassment and trespassing attempt. The officer who took the report said it was a civil matter, but that I could pursue a restraining order if the behavior continued. I also sent a formal complaint to the management company, attaching the doorbell footage and a summary of the inspection incident. The management company replied Monday morning, saying they were reviewing the matter and would provide an update after the special meeting. Stephanie sent her own email an hour later, claiming I had threatened her and created a hostile environment. She CC'd everyone again, and this time she included a detailed account of the inspection attempt that made it sound like I had been aggressive and uncooperative. She did not mention the part where I had video proof she had sabotaged my property. The special meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 7 p.m., this time at the clubhouse with proper public notice. Jason told me to bring everything: the video, the neighbor statements, the complaint log analysis, and the timeline. He also told me to invite as many neighbors as possible. The more people who show up, the harder it is for her to control the narrative, he said. So I knocked on doors again, and this time I had more support. People were angry about the parking restriction. They were angry about Stephanie's email blasts. They were angry that the board was wasting time on petty enforcement instead of fixing the snowplow damage to the curbs or addressing the ice buildup at the mailbox cluster. 10 people confirmed they would attend. Tuesday night, the clubhouse was packed. There were at least 30 residents, plus the 5 board members and a representative from the management company. Stephanie sat at the front table with her file folders and thermal printer, looking calm and composed. Gerald called the meeting to order and said they would be reviewing the complaints against me and the video evidence I had submitted. He asked Stephanie to present her side first. She stood up and delivered a practice speech about community standards, safety obligations, and the importance of accountability. She said I had been a problem resident since day one, that I had filed frivolous complaints to harass her, and that my behavior at the inspection was proof of my hostility. She said the video I had submitted was taken out of context and did not show the full picture. She said she had been spreading ice melt as a courtesy to prevent exactly the kind of hazard I was complaining about. She was smooth, confident, and convincing. A few people in the audience nodded along. Then it was my turn. I stood up and walked to the front. I did not use notes. I just started talking. I said I had moved to Frostwood because I wanted a home, not a battlefield. I said Stephanie had targeted me from day one with manufactured complaints, falsified records, and harassment. I said I had proof she had created the black ice incident herself, and then fined me for it. I played the video on my laptop, projected onto the wall so everyone could see. I narrated what was happening. That is Stephanie Perez at 11 p.m., pouring liquid onto my sidewalk, I said. The next morning, she showed up and fined me $200 for the ice she created. That is fraud. That is evidence tampering. That is abuse of power. The room was silent. I played it twice more, pausing on the clear frames of her face and the bottle. Stephanie tried to interrupt, but Gerald told her to wait. I kept going. I pulled out the neighbor statements and read them. I showed the complaint log with the identical phrasing. I explained how Stephanie had used her position as secretary to manufacture a paper trail and attribute complaints to people who never filed them. I showed the timeline of fines, notices, and harassment, all leading up to the parking restriction that punished the entire neighborhood because she wanted to hurt me. Then I looked at Stephanie and said, "You told me to make it public. You said you love watching people get embarrassed. Well, here we are." The room erupted. People started shouting questions at Stephanie. One woman stood up and said Stephanie had done the same thing to her last year, filing fake noise complaints until she sold her house and moved. Another guy said Stephanie had tried to fine him for parking his work truck in his own driveway. The meeting turned into chaos. Gerald tried to regain control, but it was too late. Linda stood up and said the board needed to vote immediately on whether to remove Stephanie from her position. Another board member seconded. Stephanie started yelling that they could not do that, that it was a violation of procedure, that she had not been given notice. Linda said the video evidence was enough to justify emergency action, and the bylaws allowed for removal with cause. Gerald looked miserable, but he called for a vote. Stephanie tried to interrupt, and the meeting voted anyway. 4-1, Stephanie was removed as board secretary effective immediately. The audience applauded. Stephanie grabbed her thermal printer, shoved her folders into a bag, and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The board voted again, this time to rescind all fines issued to me and to refund the money I had already paid. They also voted to form a committee to audit all complaints Stephanie had filed over the past 3 years and to contact every affected homeowner. Linda proposed a settlement that included refunds and limits on enforcement, and it passed unanimously. The management company representatives said they would issue a formal apology and revise the winter maintenance rules to remove the 4-hour window and other unenforceable provisions. Jason, who had been sitting in the back, gave me a thumbs up. It was not over, but it was a win. 2 days later, the HOA issued a memo clarifying the rules Stephanie had weaponized. The 4-hour snow removal window was removed entirely, and the new policy stated that homeowners must clear walkways within a reasonable time frame based on weather conditions, with no specific deadline. The memo also stated that all complaints must include the name and signature of the complainant, and anonymous or third-party complaints would no longer be accepted. It was a direct response to Stephanie's abuse, and it closed the loopholes she had exploited. Stephanie received a written warning for harassment behavior, though she never responded. She stopped attending board meetings and stopped walking the neighborhood with her clipboard. A few weeks later, her house went up for sale. The fallout continued for months. The audit committee found over 60 bogus complaints Stephanie had filed under other people's names. They sent letters to every affected homeowner offering refunds and formal apologies. 3 families who had moved because of Stephanie's harassment were contacted, and 2 of them filed small claims cases against the HOA for emotional distress and moving costs. The HOA settled both cases quietly. The board also updated the bylaws to require that all enforcement actions be reviewed by the full board before fines were issued, preventing any one person from having the power Stephanie had abused. But Stephanie was not done. 2 weeks after the special meeting, I found a notice on my door. It was not an HOA notice. It was a handwritten letter on plain paper unsigned, saying that I had made an enemy and that karma works both ways. I took it to the police, and they added it to the harassment report. The next day, I got a call from a blocked number. A woman's voice, not Stephanie's, said I should watch my back. I hung up and filed another report. Jason told me to apply for a restraining order, and I did. The court granted a temporary order, and Stephanie was served. She did not contest it, and the order became permanent. The neighborhood changed after that. People started speaking up at board meetings. They started questioning fines and asking for documentation. The board elected a new secretary, a retired accountant named Tom, who ran the meetings by the book and published detailed minutes online. Violations dropped by 80% because people were not being targeted anymore. The winter rules were enforced fairly, and when someone actually did create a hazard, the board worked with them to fix it instead of issuing instant fines. Frostwood became what it was supposed to be: a community, not a compliance factory. I ran into Stephanie once more before she moved. It was at the mailbox cluster during a snowstorm. She was checking her mail, and I was clearing the ice from the walkway because the HOA had not gotten to it yet. She looked at me, and for a second, I thought she might say something. But she just turned and walked away. Her house sold in March, and she moved to Spokane. I heard from a neighbor that she joined another HOA board there. I hope they are ready. My family event went off without a hitch. My parents stayed for the weekend, and we spent Saturday afternoon walking around the neighborhood, pointing out houses and telling stories. My sister asked if I regretted buying in an HOA, and I said no. The HOA was not the problem, I said. Stephanie was. And she is gone. My dad said I had handled it well, that standing up to bullies is hard, but worth it. My mom just hugged me and said she was proud. It felt good. Jason became a regular visitor. He helped me navigate the follow-up with the board, and when they asked me to join the compliance committee, he encouraged me to accept. I served for a year, helping rewrite the enforcement policies and train new board members. It was tedious work, but it mattered. We built a system where violations were documented, warnings were issued before fines, and homeowners had a clear path to appeal. We also set up a hotline for reporting board abuse, managed by the management company instead of the board itself. It was not perfect, but it was better. The settlement that included refunds and limits on enforcement became a model for other HOAs in the area. The management company shared the revised policies with their other clients, and several adopted similar changes. Jason told me that Frostwood's story had gone semi-viral in property management circles, not because of the drama, but because it showed that HOA abuse could be stopped without dissolving the association or going to court. It was proof that communities could reform themselves if enough people cared. The winter after Stephanie left was quiet. The first snow fell in November, and I shoveled my driveway without looking over my shoulder. No stopwatch, no clipboard, no thermal printer. The new board sent out a reminder email about snow removal, but it was reasonable. Clear your walks when you can, salt icy spots, and call if you need help. That was it. No 4-hour windows. No fines for technique. No manufactured compliance crises. Just neighbors taking care of their property and helping each other when needed. I kept my doorbell camera running, though, not because I expected trouble, but because the footage had saved me once, and I was not taking chances. The camera caught a lot of mundane stuff: delivery drivers, neighbors walking dogs, kids playing in the snow. But it also caught something unexpected. One night in December, A car pulled up across the street, and someone got out and walked toward my house. I watched on my phone, ready to call the police. But it was just Mark, the neighbor who had testified at the meeting. He left a plate of cookies on my porch with a note that said, "Thanks for standing up. We all needed it." I brought the plate inside and shared the cookies with my girlfriend, who had moved in with me that fall. She had heard the whole story, and she said she was glad I had fought back. "Me too," I said. The HOA held elections in January, and 3 of the 5 board seats turned over. Gerald retired, citing health reasons, though everyone knew he was embarrassed by the Stephanie scandal. Linda was re-elected, and 2 new members joined, both younger homeowners who had been vocal at the special meeting. Tom stayed on as secretary, and the board hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations. The new structure meant that no single person could control the paperwork or the enforcement process. It was a clean break from the past. Stephanie's house was bought by a couple with 2 kids. They were friendly, normal people who shoveled their driveway without drama and waved when they saw me. The first time we talked, they mentioned they had heard stories about the previous owner and were glad she was gone. I did not elaborate. I just said the neighborhood was better now, and they agreed. They fit in quickly, joining the community group chat and volunteering for the spring cleanup committee. It was nice to see the house occupied by people who wanted to be part of the community instead of controlling it. The audit committee finished their work in February and published a final report. It was 10 pages long and detailed every fake complaint Stephanie had filed, every fine she had issued without board approval, and every policy she had twisted to target specific homeowners. The report also included recommendations for preventing future abuse, including term limits for board positions, mandatory training for new board members, and annual audits of enforcement actions. The board adopted all the recommendations, and the updated bylaws were sent to every homeowner for review. It was a slow, bureaucratic process, but it worked. I stayed involved with the HOA for another year, then stepped back to focus on work and life. The apartment maintenance supervisor job kept me busy, and I was getting called out for snow-related issues at the complexes I managed. Frozen pipes, ice dam leaks, heating failures, the usual winter chaos. But every time I dealt with a difficult tenant or a property manager who wanted to cut corners, I thought about Stephanie and how she had turned enforcement into a weapon. It reminded me to be fair, to listen, and to solve problems instead of creating them. I like to think I was better at my job because of what I went through at Frostwood. The final piece of the story came in March. I got a letter from the Idaho Attorney General's office. Someone had filed a formal complaint against the preserve at Frostwood HOA, alleging violations of the state's open meeting laws and fraudulent enforcement practices. The AG's office had investigated and found enough evidence to issue a warning to the HOA and a small fine for the bylaws violations. The letter said the case was closed, but the HOA was now on a watch list and would be subject to additional scrutiny if any future complaints were filed. I did not know who had filed the original complaint, but I suspected it was one of the families Stephanie had driven out. Either way, it was the last nail in the coffin. The HOA could not go back to the old ways even if it wanted to. Spring came, and the snow melted. The curbs that the snowplow had damaged were repaired, and the HOA planted new trees along the main road. The mailbox cluster got a fresh coat of paint, and someone installed a little free library near the entrance. Frostwood started to feel like the place I had hoped it would be when I bought my house. People said hello. They stopped to chat. They helped each other with yard work and borrowed tools and traded recipes. It was not perfect, but it was good. I stayed in touch with Jason, and he told me stories about other HOAs he was dealing with. Some were worse than Frostwood, some were better. But they all had the same problem: too much power in too few hands and not enough accountability. He said the best HOAs were the ones where people paid attention, asked questions, and did not let one person run the show. That is what we did at Frostwood, I said. Exactly, he said. And that is why you won. I never saw Stephanie again, but I heard she lasted less than a year in Spokane before the HOA there pushed her out. Apparently, she tried the same tricks, but the board was onto her from the start. Someone had Googled her name and found news articles about the Frostwood scandal. The Idaho property management world is small, and word travels fast. She moved again, this time to Montana, and I lost track of her after that. I hope she learned something, but I doubt it. People like Stephanie do not change. They just find new places to cause problems. The rideshare driver I had talked to during the mess became a friend. His name was Carlos, and he was studying to be a paralegal. He said watching the HOA fight had inspired him to focus on housing law. We had coffee a few times, and he asked detailed questions about the evidence I had gathered and how the hearing had gone. He said he wanted to help people fight back against landlords and HOAs who abused their power. I told him he would be good at it, and I meant it. He had seen enough nonsense driving around Coeur d'Alene to know how bad it could get. The last time I thought about Stephanie was in late April. I was shoveling the last patch of old snow from my driveway, clearing it before the final melt turned everything into mud. I heard a car door slam and looked up. It was Tom, the new board secretary. He waved and walked over. "Just wanted to check in," he said. "Make sure everything is good." I told him everything was fine, and I appreciated the board's work over the past few months. He said the HOA was in a good place now, and he credited me for kicking off the reforms. I said it was not just me. It was everyone who showed up and spoke up. He smiled and said that was exactly right. Then he handed me a card. It was an invitation to a neighborhood barbecue the HOA was hosting in May. "Bring your family," he said. "Let's celebrate getting through the winter." I said I would be there. The barbecue was great. 50 people showed up, and we grilled burgers and hot dogs and sat around picnic tables telling stories. Nobody mentioned Stephanie by name, but a few people made jokes about the old days and how crazy things used to be. Linda gave a short speech thanking everyone for their patience during the transition and promising that the board would keep working to make Frostwood a place people wanted to live. Everyone clapped, and then we went back to eating and talking and watching the kids play on the grass. It felt normal, and normal felt like a victory. I am still here. I am still in my house in Frostwood, and I plan to stay. The HOA is not perfect, but it is functional, and that is enough. I shovel my snow when it falls. I clear the ice when it forms. I follow the rules because they are fair now, and enforcement is consistent. I do not worry about clipboards or stopwatches or thermal printers. I do not worry about someone manufacturing a crisis to justify their own importance. I just live my life, and that is how it should be. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.